Young Hearts by Brandon L. Breeze, from the short story collection Love and Nightmares, now available on Amazon. A dim lantern light flickered across Fala's angular, tear-stained cheeks. She sat alone at the foot of her bed, tracing the intricate stitching of the wedding dress she was meant to wear the next morning. For a long time she'd dreamed of being a blushing bride, pristine in her white gown. But that wasn't the way the schoolmarms and townsfolk saw her. No, they rarely said it to her face, but she heard the whispers. To them she was and would always be a dirty, red-skinned savage. "You're going to look radiant in that tomorrow," Mrs. Lawton said, entering the bedroom and interrupting Fala's thoughts. "The same as I did years ago." Fala smiled, a thin, obliging smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now get some sleep," Mrs. Lawton said, gesturing Fala into bed and under the covers. "You're soon to be my daughter-in-law." Before long, Fala was left alone again with her thoughts. As she lay there in the dark, her mind drifted back to the night, a little more than 3 years ago, when her life took a drastic new path. Fala had lay awake thinking, same as she was doing now. She'd been a ball of confusion, betrothed to Chogan, a young brave from her Chickasaw tribe, and yet struggling to quiet an internal calling from the world outside. Was she in love with Chogan? Did she even know what it meant to be in love? Or was she blindly following a tradition that demanded she take on the role of wife and mother simply because 16 winters had passed? Fala clenched her eyes shut in an attempt to block out the visages of shame and disappointment she imagined on everyone's faces if she backed out of her commitment. The relentless, nocturnal sounds of the forest heightened her dread, but she wouldn't surrender to anticipated regret. She decided she was going to make her own path, no matter where it led. As the rest of her tribe slept, Fala escaped into the night. She ran between the torchlit houses, their thatched roofs blending with the black sky. Her eyes remained forward as the only world she'd ever known faded into a blur behind her. By the time her body and determination was exhausted, she was in a distant place that she'd never been, and reality came crashing down on her like a stone. She was cold and hungry and more alone than she knew possible. Fala wasn't sure she even knew how to get back home if she wanted to. The only thing familiar to her was the ever-present sound of yips and chirps and screeches that drowned out her sobs. Then even that dissolved as the entire land seemed to hold its breath. Fala settled down on the dry moss, shivering and afraid, not just of her current circumstances, but of what lay ahead. She wasn't sure when sleep overtook her, but the next time Fala opened her eyes, the countryside was bathed in the golden light of morning. Footsteps crunched toward her in the leaves. She barely had the strength to look up when she saw a boy standing above her. He wasn't much older than she was and had the most warm, nurturing smile she'd ever seen. Somehow she instantly felt everything would be okay. Fala shifted in her bed, holding the memory of Scott's kindly face in mind. If she could only freeze time and exist in that moment. It was late in the evening when Scott Lawton ambled out of the saloon. He was filled with celebration as the moment of his forthcoming nuptials to the love of his life drew closer. The town was still lively, but all he could think about was falling into bed and opening his eyes to the big day. He was halfway down the road when he sensed he wasn't alone. Scott slowed his pace but heard only laughing, chattering, and the clinking of piano keys from the various saloons behind him. He shrugged it off, assuming it was just his nerves. After another few steps, he heard shuffling feet. He was sure of it. Turning his head slowly in the direction of the noise, he examined the darkened storefronts and empty walkways. Nothing. Scott started back walking, quickening his stride. His stomach felt queasy, like the moment after someone tells you they have bad news. In about 20 yards, his gut was proven right. A figure sprang from out of the shadows holding a rifle. Scott turned to run and had barely taken a step when he felt the sting of hot lead in his back. He fell forward to the ground, unable to pinpoint where he'd been hit as pain coursed down his side and thigh. He looked over his shoulder in time to see the silhouette of a man wearing fringed clothes and feathers disappear around the corner. Scott hobbled to his feet and stumbled down the beaten dirt road all the way home. He pushed open the front door and lumbered inside. His father, who'd been resting in his favorite chair, ran to Scott and grabbed his arm to keep him steady. "What happened, son?" Scott tried to speak, but couldn't manage it through his labored breaths. "Mr." Lawton lifted his son's arm around his neck to help support the young man's wobbly legs. He then led Scott upstairs into his cool, dimly lit room. Mr. Lawton saw that Scott's pants were soaked in blood and lowered him on his side on the bed. "We've got to stop that bleeding." Rushing out of the room, Mr. Lawton returned with bandages. As he worked to wrap the wound, Scott found his voice. "Where's Fala?" he asked. "She's asleep," Mr. Lawton said, briefly glancing back at the door. He then returned to what he was doing and secured the tourniquet. "Is that too tight?" "Huh," Scott said, his mind taking a moment to process what he was asked before answering with a despondent, "It's fine." "You should be okay," Mr. Lawton said. "The bullet didn't hit anything major, but I still want Doc Allen to take a look at it." As Mr. Lawton turned to leave, Scott grabbed his sleeve. "A redskin did this, Pa," he said. "One of Fala's people." The wrinkles on Mr. Lawton's face deepened and he swiped a hand through his peppered hair. "I was afraid of that." "He'll be back," Scott said resolutely. "We'll sort it all out in the morning." "But Pa," Scott rose up with an audible grunt. "I've got to," Mr. Lawton cut him off and finished his son's sentence. "You've got to get some rest." Listening just outside, Fala stood with her back pressed against the wall and her heart in her throat. The thing she feared for so long was happening. When Mr. Lawton disappeared back downstairs, she slipped into Scott's room and closed the door behind her. "Get out of here," Scott said in a hushed whisper. "It's bad luck for a man to see his bride the night before the wedding." "Who did this?" Fala asked, ignoring everything she'd heard from outside. "It was an Indian." Scott's expression turned cold. "And I think you know why." Fala pursed her lips and looked away. She did know why. She also knew who, the one man who had an interest in stopping her wedding. But Chogan didn't even know where she was. Or did he? "But don't you worry," Scott said, his eyes steely and determined. "I'm going out come first light and make sure he won't get in the way of our destiny." Fala shook her head, frustration mounting. "Why do men always think violence is the only solution?" "That's the world we live in," Scott snapped. "Do you know a better way?" Fala glared at him, her eyes pooling with tearful intensity. She shook her head once more before turning in a huff and marching out. Scott tried to stand and chase after her but fell back onto the bed, wincing in pain. Back in her room, Fala paced back and forth, the wooden floor creaking under her steps. She couldn't stand the thought of more blood being spilled. All she ever wanted was to live by her own terms, not bring pain to people she cared about. She made up her mind that she had to find Chogan before anyone else did, before it was too late. Draped in a hooded shawl and clutching a small hunting knife, one of the few reminders she kept of her old life, Fala treaded lightly through the house. She heard angry, muffled voices in the front room. Was that the sheriff? Would they form a posse? Her sense of urgency grew. Fala barely breathed as she eased out of the back door and swiftly made her way across the dewy grass toward the forest tree line. She reckoned that if Chogan had come to take her back to the Chickasaw, he'd be out there somewhere, watching and waiting. When she reached the low-lying edge of the property, Fala could hardly see through the thick fog. As the nighttime creatures sang their lullaby, she leaned against a towering willow tree and scanned the dark, shadowy woods. Then she saw him. Chogan emerged from the forest like a nature spirit. His rifle was slung across his back, and the feathers in his hair swayed in the wind. Fala stared breathlessly at a face that seemed to have been from another lifetime. Finally, she remembered her purpose. "So it really was you who shot Scott." "You were supposed to be my wife," Chogan said, his voice tinged in heartache and bitterness. "I had to find out who I was," Fala said. "You ran from who you were, who you are still." "You don't know who I am today," Fala said sharply. "I'm not the same naive girl." "I know that you're a Chickasaw," Chogan said. "That won't change no matter how far you run or how many of their clothes you wear." Chogan stepped forward and ripped the shawl from Fala's shoulders. The hunting knife that Fala held in her hand glinted in the moonlight. Chogan glanced down at the weapon. "Is that meant for me?" Fala's lip quivered and her chest tightened. "Come back with me, Fala." Chogan took the knife and tossed it to the ground. "You belong with your own people." Fala was paralyzed with indecision. Was he right? Had she been fooling herself to think that someone like her could ever truly be free? "They'll never accept you," Chogan went on. "You'll always be dirt on their boots. Be my wife and I'll make things easy for you." Fala heard footfalls crashing through the brush, cutting through the tension. She spun around to see Scott, bareheaded and his shirt half-buttoned, hobbling toward them. "Get away from her," Scott growled. "This is between us," Chogan said. Scott slumped next to a tree, weak from blood loss. "The hell it is," he choked out, raising his pistol like it weighed 50 pounds. Chogan stood tall and erect like an unflinching totem. Fala ran to Scott, placing herself in the line of fire. "No, Scott, don't." Scott wrapped a protective arm around her. "Are you all right?" His blue eyes glowed with deep concern and affection. "I'm all right," Fala said as clarity washed over her. She turned her attention back to Chogan, who waited for an answer like a hungry wolf. "I'm just where I belong," Fala said, returning Scott's embrace. "Love is not about choosing the easiest path, but whichever path your heart leads you." Chogan's penetrating stare remained fixed on Fala, looking at her like he knew something she didn't. Then, without a word, he turned and began his descent down the jagged slope. In a few paces, he was engulfed by the twilight shadows of the forest. The young couple kept their embrace, and Fala felt the weight of all her worries melting away. Finally, as the first rays of morning filtered through the trees, Fala sighed heavily and looked up at Scott. Without a shred of jest, she said, "Let's go home. We have a big day ahead of us."